Hello and welcome to the Prisoner Officer Podcast. This podcast is a place to talk about the forgotten cops in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do. The other day I saw on a Facebook post, a post from the Missouri Patriot Guard and the VFW who were honoring a local veteran with a motorcycle drive-by to celebrate the milestone of him turning 100 years old on September 9th of this year. Robert Bob Burks served in the U.S. Navy during World War II from 1942 through 1945. He was in college at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack and enlisted for service shortly thereafter. He served as a pharmacist mate in the Pacific Theater and then was interestingly loaned to the United States Marine Corps on the island of Samoa to function as a medic, helping treat Marines involved in that brutal campaign to recover those South Pacific islands taken by the Japanese early in the war. Bob was able to return 25 years ago to be reunited with the people of Samoa and to be honored accordingly. You know, I love our veterans, and it was great to read Bob's story and his heroic service in the Pacific. And as I continued to read, at the bottom of the post, almost as an afterthought was written, after his military service, his work included 31 years as a guard at the Federal Medical Center in Springfield. I myself worked at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. I was there for 14 years, and I know 31 years as a guard is an absolutely amazing feat all by itself. So I reached out to the organizers to make contact with Mr. Burks, and I'm extremely happy to tell you that in today's episode, we're going to get to talk to Mr. Burks and hear about his amazing life and his time as a prison officer. Welcome to the Prisoner Officer Podcast, Bob. I'm very excited to have you on the podcast.
Oh, well, I'm surprised.
You're surprised? What are you surprised about?
Well, to be honored for working in the Bureau of Prisons, I'll tell you, I was only about 26 years, actually.
Okay.
I retired early because I had a bad back injury at one time, and it got worse. I was off for a while and went back to the Bureau, but then I decided to retire. Right.
Well, 26 years is quite a milestone also. For anybody that's ever done prison work, they know just how long that is. You know, we got a lot of ground to cover today, but I guess I'd like to start with, just from the beginning. Let's start with where you grew up and a little bit about your childhood. Where'd you grow up at?
Well, I grew up along the Pecos River of New Mexico.
Oh, wow.
A long time ago, I'll tell you.
Yeah? I think you told me the other day that New Mexico had only been a state for 2 years when you were born.
That's right. It was, my dad was an oil man.
Okay.
And he was looking for oil. And we moved to a little town, and we got settled there. And I started school in Sierra Blanca, which was mostly Mexican town down in Texas.
Okay.
On the border, but mostly I grew up in Carlsbad. I worked for the Bureau of Prisons from there. Well, actually, I was with a security outfit out of Los Alamos.
Okay.
Which was on the bomb, you know.
Uh-huh.
And I traveled around the country. I had a top secret clearance.
Now, was this after?
And I escorted.
Was this after the war?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is after you'd come back from the war. You're working at Los Alamos.
Well, I was working at Sandia Corporation, which was part of Los Alamos, but it was in Albuquerque.
Okay.
And I was on a top secret. I had a top secret clearance. And I escorted atomic material around the country.
Oh, wow. A dangerous job.
Well, sometimes, yes.
Right.
We flew in the old Goonie Bird airplane all the time.
Uh-huh.
And hit a number of different places. But I had just gotten married, and we were in Albuquerque, and I was gone a lot. So I decided that I need to get into something else. So I took the examination for the Bureau of Prisons at Albuquerque.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I know it's changed a lot over the years. What do you remember about was it a civil service exam, or was it a specific to the Bureau?
It was Bureau because they about ruined my reputation in my hometown because they went down and was questioning people even when I was in grade school.
Oh, yeah.
And I went to visit, and they said, "What kind of trouble are you in?" I said, "These FBI men been around."
Yeah, we still do. We still do background investigations. I think that still happens. Yeah. Where did you apply at? Which prisons?
Leavenworth.
Okay, you just applied at Leavenworth, and is that where you got hired?
Yeah, I went to work at Leavenworth. I was in Albuquerque, and hadn't been married long, just had that little boy, and I was traveling a lot on that job because I had a top secret clearance.
Right.
Traveling with atomic energy, and I was going a lot, which didn't work too well, newly married, you know. So I took the examination for the Bureau of Prisons.
Right.
And they told me they were going to call me. So my wife left and come back to Missouri to be with her folks who were there in Springfield.
Okay.
And I finished out there, and then I went to the Bureau of Prisons.
About what year was that? Do you remember?
Oh, gosh. You're talking to an old man.
Yeah, yeah. You got 100 years there to remember across, don't you? I was just wondering. So, had you known anybody that worked in the prison system before that, or was that?
No, but it's funny. I came back here, my dad and mother were originally from Bolivar.
Okay.
And they went west, and I grew up in the west. And I was back here visiting when they opened the medical center for visitors when it was brand new.
Uh-huh.
And my uncle and my dad and I went through the Bureau of Prisons here. I had no idea that one of these days I'd be spending a lot of time there,
Yeah.
And it was open to the public for about 2 or 3 weeks. People examined it before they ever took any prisoners.
Right. I don't think some of us, and I worked at Springfield, but I don't think some of us understand how big a deal that was at the time for that prison to come into Springfield. Springfield, I believe, donated the land. And
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of impact was that on the communities back then?
Oh, gosh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that people were rather leery that lived around it.
Right.
They were just leery having a penitentiary in their backyard, to tell you the truth.
Sure.
And
was that considered a good job back then? Or,
gosh, I don't know. It was with the government,
right?
And I quit the government job in Albuquerque and took it,
Uh-huh.
And I suppose it was probably considered a pretty good job in those days. You had good retirement and everything.
Right,
and,
right.
But I had no idea that one day I'd be working there. I don't know when it opened. I've forgotten. Can you tell me?
Yeah, it was 1933 was when Springfield opened.
Well, I was back here. That would have made me, 1933. About 13 years old when I went through it first time.
Wow.
Man.
Interesting. So you start at Leavenworth.
I started at Leavenworth, yeah.
And tell me about that. What was Leavenworth like at that time?
Well, it was a penitentiary.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It wasn't a rest home.
Right.
And everything was very military-like, there's 2 penitentiaries at Leavenworth.
Yeah, the military the DB is what they call it, the disciplinary barracks.
Yeah. But when I went to work at Leavenworth, it was a penitentiary. In fact, we had the worst of the country, there at Leavenworth.
Oh, absolutely.
And Machine Gun Kelly, I locked him up. Remember him?
Yeah. Oh,
and
wow.
a lot of those old timers were alive then,
Absolutely, yeah. So, and I know that I kind of wonder, I've worked as a correctional officer recently, but what was your day like then? I mean, when I walk into a prison now, the inmates are out and they're about. During that time, were you guys, was it more orderly? Were you marching them? They had assigned seating. I've seen pictures of that at Leavenworth.
Oh, yes. They went on the meals and things. They marched in and never made a sound. Stayed right against the wall, single file.
Mm-hmm.
They'd march into and get they had little carts as they went in, and they'd get their eating irons, as we called it, their tray and everything.
Right.
And they'd go sit down at the table. Well, actually, we had a counter, to feed them.
Sure.
And they'd get their food, and they'd have 100, and you'd never hear a thing except just their eating.
Okay, so they weren't allowed
to talk, very quiet, and then we marched them out back into their cells. So there wasn't any that. Then at certain times, certain inmates got to go to the yard in those days.
Uh-huh.
And it was run as strictly as a penitentiary then,
Absolutely.
instead of a rest home.
Yeah. So, and I don't know the answer to this question, but were gangs a problem back then? Did you deal with that? Inmate gangs? Was that a problem during that time? Yeah.
No, we had no organized, no.
Okay. Yeah, that probably...
It was, it was all strictly, well, I don't know what you call it, but they were kept under control.
Right.
We had a prison camp, and they worked over on the Missouri River on the farm. We had a big farm over there.
Right.
And we'd take these trustees over there, and I spent a lot of time with it. I'd maybe have 20 in my group.
Uh-huh.
And I'd take them out in the fields. We raised all the food that they ate. We had a big dairy up there.
Okay.
And the convicts took care of the dairy, took care of the farms and everything, and we would have groups that we would take.
Right.
And we had, fact is, I run down 2 of them that escaped. I caught them later on. And, but it was, we had, what did they call that then? Well, it was a camp over there for trustees, that worked in the farms.
Right. What I have heard, I worked at Leavenworth for a couple of years, they called it 2 farm. Does that sound familiar, or is that something from later on?
I never heard that.
Yeah, it's still there. Leavenworth still owns that land. It's called...
Yeah, well, we had some barracks down there, yes.
Oh, wow.
Trustees lived in the barracks down there.
And
we worked them on the farm, and then we'd, of course, we had trustees, in the top up there, and we'd take crews down in the buses and work them and bring them back that night, check them back in.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, we had a big dairy farm where they milked all the cows, and the milk, we sent milk down to the Springfield prison.
Right.
It came on the train every day. We'd send milk down from here, and we had quite a dairy herd up there.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Of course, the trustees did most of that work,
Sure. Wow. So how many years did you work at Leavenworth?
I don't know. Only about, I think, around 2 years.
Okay.
I wanted to come to Springfield because my mother and dad my dad and them retired and moved to Springfield during the war. Because my brother and I were in the service, and they were afraid we might come home, injured and things.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad retired and come back here, and he said, I want a place in case you boys were something, that you would come home to.
Sure. And, of course, your wife was from Springfield also. So,
yeah. Her father was a professor at the university.
That would have been the Teachers College then, which is now MSU, right?
Yeah. He didn't work there. He worked at Columbia.
Oh, okay, MU.
Yeah. He was, what do they call? Oh, thunder. I have a good memory, but it's so short.
I understand.
You're talking to an old man.
Right. You got a lot to remember, more than most people. 100 years old, quite a milestone. So you get to Springfield. Did you know what they did at Springfield too much that they had the mental health before you came down here?
Yeah, when I first came down here, we run more like a penitentiary. We had a part of the penitentiary was farm workers, on
trustees
where they lived,
right,
and they worked in the fields. In fact, we'd every once in a while one of them run away. In fact, I caught one that run away one time.
Yeah.
But we had the prison camp, and they were, with short timers, stuff like that. But the penitentiary, Springfield was a penitentiary when I came down here, really, because I worked in what we called the North Side, individual convict cells.
Okay.
And we locked them that evening, and we had the very worst of the convicts were in those wells, and we got just like the old Stroud, the Birdman from Alcatraz.
Right.
They sent him to us when they closed the Alcatraz, and we had all the old hard shell convicts in.
Yeah.
And it was more of a penitentiary than a hospital, to tell you the truth.
Well, tell me about Stroud. I've heard that name. What was he like?
Oh, that's old Stroud. Well, he lived in Alaska.
Uh-huh.
Like, Alaska then was a territory, and all the penitentiaries in Alaska was run by the Bureau of Prisons.
Oh.
And he was he had I forget what he's doing, but he's a pimp.
Huh.
And he called this bartender, and he had a customer, and he wanted the bartender to send a woman over to. Well, the bartender shorted him a little money, and Stroud went over and killed him.
Oh, wow.
Well, anything in Alaska then was a federal because of the territory.
Okay.
So they took old Stroud, and they sent him to... there goes that memory.
Yeah.
But there, he killed a convict there, and they sent him to Leavenworth.
Uh-huh.
And then at Leavenworth, he killed another convict.
Oh, wow.
And then he killed an officer at Leavenworth. And they sent him to Alcatraz.
Right.
And when Alcatraz closed, they sent him to Springfield.
So he wasn't the guy that they portrayed in the movie by any means.
Oh, I'll tell you something funny on that. Burt Lancaster played his part.
Uh-huh.
And I was on the gate when Burt Lancaster came to see Stroud, on account of the movie.
Oh, wow.
They had, in California, they had this thing, Free the Birdman, after the movie. And a bunch of weirdos out, Free the Birdman.
I'll be darned.
Stroud. Well, he came to visit him, and I was on the gate. When he come out, I said, well, what do you think of Stroud? And he said, he's right where he belongs. And he walked through the gate and left.
That's wonderful.
That was Burt Lancaster. He played the part.
Right, yeah.
But Stroud had a girlfriend.
Right.
And his girlfriend's name was Du Bois. And you know, when old Stroud died that afternoon, and at midnight that night, we transferred his sweetie to another institution.
Right.
Got him out of Springfield, you know.
Absolutely.
Because cut down on publicity and all that crap, you know.
Right. Right.
But the only decent thing he ever done was die.
Yeah, I think we've all dealt with, at one time or another, those famous inmates that the public perception is totally different than what we deal with on the inside.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, what?
At Leavenworth, you know, we had Machine Gun Kelly and all them guys, the Kimes gang and everything when I was there.
Uh-huh.
And they were long time locked up, and they didn't give us any problems.
Right.
But these young criminals come in would give us more trouble than the old long-term convicts, you know.
Right. So I guess that's one of my questions. You know, since I've been in prison, we started off, you know, some inmates at some penitentiaries we called convicts, and then the popular name was to call them inmate, and now a lot of places call them resident. How did you?
Yeah, I'll tell you.
So how did you guys refer?
I was glad to get out of the prison service. It was getting too sissified for me.
So what did you refer to them as inmates, or were they convicts?
They were convicts or inmates, either one.
Okay, so you used both terms. I wondered about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, I had a nickname out there.
Okay.
I was Trigger Burks.
Trigger Burks. Why is that?
Trigger, yeah. I was nicknamed that because a little bit on the trigger, quick on the trigger, you know, when a convict would give me problems.
Okay.
And they started it. And, you know, when I retired, and I've been working out there all those years, one of the lieutenants come up to me at my retirement dinner, and he says, Trigger? He says, what in the hell's your name? all they knew was Trigger.
That's hilarious.
You know? And when we had that riot, you know, I was 3 shifts there at the penitentiary, you know, after that riot, during the riot.
Yeah, it was 1959, right?
Somewhere along there. But my wife called out to the institution because I didn't come home, you know, for 3 shifts.
Right.
And she wanted to know if I was all right. And she says, Bob Burks. And the man in the control room says, well, who is that? And she says, well, Trigger. Oh, Mrs. Trigger, he said. He's okay. You know.
So she's even Mrs. Trigger. I'll be darned.
Yeah, that was my nickname. Nobody knew my first name.
That's funny.
I know on my retirement dinner, the lieutenant I'd been working with come up and he says, Trigger, what's your name? You know.
Wow. So tell me what you remember about the 59 riot.
It was in 10 North, the homosexuals.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
And they took over that 10 North section over there. And they, of course, Rosendahl, a friend of mine, he just died here recently. You didn't know him, I don't guess.
I met him once, but I did read about Bob Rosenthal.
Yeah, he was a prisoner, you know, the Japs. He was in prison for the Japs during World War II.
Yep, a POW.
Yeah, and he was in, he spent most of his time in China in a prison camp.
Wow.
In China. But Rosendahl, he was one of the officers they took, you know. Mm-hmm. They beat him up pretty bad, but he was pretty well liked. And one of the homos in there locked him in a cell and kind of saved his bacon.
Right.
Well, they had gotten all the keys and everything, and we couldn't get in. So we put a bulldozer around there by the 10 North, hooked onto the big barred windows, pull the whole thing out, and we went in there. They've sent down a bunch of officers from Leavenworth, too. and give us all a billy club, and we went through that pour, and we had everything that moved.
Right.
In fact, we killed, I think, 2 convicts died with that.
I'll be darned.
But found old Rosie. He was locked in a cell, and they'd beat him up pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was mostly homosexuals in that whole 10 North side.
Is that like a protective custody unit? Is that
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 10 North was all single cell.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, you've been 10 North, haven't you?
Yes, sir. Yep.
But there's one section was homosexuals.
Okay.
And another section was just the troublemaking convicts that we had on single cells, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Locked in those units.
I've read, some of those, a Time Life magazine article from back then that actually has some pictures of what you described, which is the bulldozer, coming around. I think you guys were building the gym, the rec area is why the bulldozer was in there, right? I think that's what was going on at the time. And that's why.
Well, we just hooked onto the, I can't remember whether there's a bulldozer or whether there's a big road grader machine. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's a bulldozer in the picture.
Was it?
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
I can't remember, but we hooked on with chains to the big cell windows there because they had the keys, We couldn't get into the north side.
Uh-huh.
And we just pulled it off, and then we just piled through there. About 100 of us. And hit everything that moved.
Yeah. Took your prison back, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It didn't take us long to get them subdued.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of hairy there for a while.
Right. And I think weren't the hostages, I think the hostages were kept for 24 hours. That's quite a while. So.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I know they put them on full lockup, But we had one section of the north side where where our worst convicts were kept, the psychos.
Sure.
In fact, I worked at 10 North. When I come down from Leavenworth, they thought any officer come from Leavenworth should work in that unit. So I spent about 2 or 3 years in that north side with the psychos.
Right.
Everything.
Did you guys do a lot of medicating over there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'd go around. We had our own, we officers, did all the medicating.
That's what I'd heard.
They didn't have them doctors. They would, each unit, we would medicate the convicts, and most of the units that we worked in then had a 2-cell operation.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't open the cell unless there's 2 officers.
Right. Yep.
Because you never knew when one was come out. We've had them come out on us so many times,
Absolutely.
We had one, he was a Chinaman.
Uh-huh.
I'll never forget him. And he wouldn't come out of his cell. And we'd have to just open the cell and hand him his food. He wouldn't come out of that cell. The only time we could get him out is we had to take him out and let him bathe at one time.
Right.
And they decided to put some radio things that come through the speakers in the cell.
Yep.
And the day we turned that radio on, that's the first time that Chinaman ever come out of his cell to eat out, on the mess hall.
I'll be darned.
Or we fed them right in the unit.
Right. Those speakers are still in those cells. They still use them today.
Do they?
Yeah.
Well, that was all, top priority.
Sure.
We didn't open the cell unless there's 2 officers there,
Yeah, and I've seen pictures from the time you were there back in the 50s, and the first thing I notice is that you guys didn't have tray slots. There were no tray slots or chug holes on those doors. You opened the whole door when you had to feed or medicate or deal with an inmate.
Yeah. We opened the door.
Yeah, see.
Handed them their food.
Right.
We usually had a convict orderly, and we pushed food cart.
Wow.
And I'd open one cell at a time and feed, give them their food.
So dangerous without having those tray slots. It's just foreign to me.
Yeah, I've had to throw some of them back in.
Yeah.
A number of times. Every once in a while they jump on top of us,
Right.
You never knew.
Yeah.
I got my back hurt real bad. In fact, I was off for quite a while. I was a big convict. I used kind of a trustee convict to push a food cart.
Right.
And with him, and we opened this cell, and he's a big black guy. He come out and grabbed my inmate worker.
Right.
Was trying to kill him. And I grabbed him. I had to jump up, and I put a chokehold on his, from behind.
Sure.
And the only way I could control him, and he fell backwards against me and the doorknob.
Oh.
Got me right in the spine. And I was off about 6 weeks it hurt my spinal column.
Absolutely.
And I've had that ever since, too.
Yeah.
I was off work about, 6 or 8 weeks on account of that.
Right.
But it injured my spine. I still have a lot of trouble with it.
Wow.
But just one of those things.
Sure.
But that 10 North seemed like every time we come, any officer that came from Leavenworth, when I first went to work out there, we had public health.
Right.
And the public health was in one building mostly, and we had one nurse, or 2 nurses, I guess.
Right.
Oh, we had the only women working out there. And
Wow.
we used these public health men. They finally absorbed them and turned them into the Bureau of Prison as from public health over to us,
Sure. Well, interestingly, we have public health services that works in the prisons now.
Is that right?
Yes. So, and probably most of the prisons have at least one, or Springfield's got several public health services staff. So,
I'll be darned.
Yeah, things have kind of wrapped around.
Yeah.
So at the time you were out there, the warden at Springfield was a doctor, correct?
Yes.
So what did you guys think about that? What did the guards think about having a doctor calling the shots? Or was it just accepted?
Well, it was accepted, and the doctors didn't really mingle with the convicts. They were kind of, we had one building was our main hospital.
Mm-hmm.
One building where we had most of your rest of them were psychotic and stuff like that,
Right.
But medical, one building mostly. And then 8 building was older, kind of cripples and stuff like that.
Okay.
And, we have one officer in the desk and one officer in the ward. And then at night when we had them locked up, they just have one officer, patrolling each unit.
Right. Doing your counts and your...
Yeah.
Did you guys do, it's a common thing for me. Did you do like a 30-minute round that you had to, every 30 minutes or every hour?
No, nothing special.
Okay.
We were expected to check them. Yeah, we'd have a couple, 3 checks,
Right.
and then we'd have to call control room and tell them how many we had.
Okay.
It was.
It's so interesting just hearing the differences. Do you remember one that was the worst inmate you had?
Well, let me think. Yeah, I had 2 or 3 bad ones. But
and you may
the
not
worst.
remember.
Well, we had, of course, we had some guys in there that, were. We had lots of murderers,
Right.
And we kept them in 10. Over in 10 North, we had one unit where our worst convicts were, and it was a 2-man order to open a cell.
Right.
You didn't open a cell unless there's 2 officers there. And that's where we kept most of our bad ones.
Right.
It was in 10 north and 10 south, they called it.
Right. And
Those
still do.
units.
Still do. It's still called 10 building over there.
And the
So let me ask you a question, and I'm kind of coming back to, nowadays, some of the things that people talk about a lot is resilience and the stress of being a correctional officer. So first I want to ask you, did you consider that job stressful? And did you see the effects of that stress on you and your family?
Oh, I've seen fellas that it really got to them.
Right.
But I guess I'm just dumb enough that it never bothered me. It was a job,
Right.
and I didn't like it. In fact, I was more than happy to cover that front gate and let it slam behind me.
Right.
I never missed it for a day.
That's interesting.
They'd lock us in. We had an officer in the corridor, and he patrolled the corridor up and down in front of the units, but they locked us in, and we had no keys. You know, we couldn't even get in the cell.
Right.
Once, say at 6 o'clock in the evening or something like that, we had lockouts, and so we had some strange units, some strange convicts. I'll guarantee you that.
Right. So the roving officer would come through and he would lock you in. He would take your keys that you'd been using.
That's right.
During
keys
the day.
Went out of the gate.
And then he'd lock you
we
in.
had the corridor officer. He walked up and down. We couldn't get in the cell even.
Mm-hmm. Well, why do you think they did that? Well, that was so the inmates couldn't take over the unit?
Yeah, I think so. Once we get them fed in the evening, those cells locked, and we put them on. Of course, out in the hall is where the units where they threw the main switches, in the hall.
Right.
And after we'd get them in their evening and get them in their cell and fed and everything, well, that gate was not opened. We couldn't open them because we couldn't even get out of the units.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't even get out of the units. We didn't have the key.
Right.
That was in case they took over, they couldn't come out, grab you and come out,
Absolutely. Yeah. So did you work any of the, what we call perimeter posts? Did you work towers? Did they have a...
Yeah, I worked in the towers, yeah. We rotated about 6 weeks at a time,
Mm-hmm.
Later on, but when I first come down in Runworth, we just worked in 10 north and 10 south all the time, nearly, for a number of years.
Right.
Because that's where we had our worst convicts,
Yeah. So at Springfield, you also had reservation housing, didn't you? Was that for the doctors and the people like that?
It used to be a lot of ones lived on the campuses, lived on those places. They tore a lot of them houses down now, I guess. But we had quite a few. And most of I run around with a couple of the psychiatrists.
Uh-huh.
They was crazy as I was, so we got along fine. In fact, we were good friends on the outside,
Yeah.
when we weren't at work. We had some psychiatrists come in there. There's a nutter and a fruitcake, I'll guarantee you that.
Well, yeah.
But I know.
All of us have a time, where we were didn't know if we were going to make it out, and you think about that a lot. Was there a scariest time? Was it the riot or some other time? Maybe when you were attacked?
Well, of course, I was never, I guess I was too stupid to be afraid.
Yeah.
But I never, I figured it could work. It might help happen to somebody else, but it wouldn't happen to me.
Right.
That's the attitude I took during the war.
Mm-hmm.
I lost a lot of good friends during that war. First 2 years when we was taking the Solomons.
Right.
And I figured that my buddy might get killed, but I'd be okay.
Yeah.
And that's the way I was in the prison service. I don't know. I guess because I'm stupid. I don't know.
Oh, I think that's just keeping a positive outlook,
I get something.
Yeah, don't let the negative get you down, just always think of the positive and that things are going to work out positive.
Yeah.
And I think that's about resilience there. I think that's how people do get through some of this is that resilience that they develop. And that was your way of having resilience. Yeah.
I figured it was stupid.
I don't think anybody lives 100 years and is stupid. You've seen a lot and you've learned a lot over the years. So let me ask you this question: if you were talking to a new correctional officer these days, what's the advice? What did you learn from your time, and what advice would you give a new correctional officer?
Oh, good Lord, I don't know.
What do you think helped get you through there? Was it communication? Was it were you able to communicate with the inmates? Is that how you?
Oh yeah, I had inmates that really liked me. In fact, they would come to me with little items that might interest me. This convict or that. And I don't know. I guess it's just the way I am.
Just be who you are?
Of course, I never was during the war. The only time I was ever scared was the time that we got into an Arctic storm, and we thought the ship was going to roll over.
Oh.
And under fire and everything like that, I was never afraid. Just stupidity, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit of fatalism. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess it's always going to happen to the other guy.
Right. So.
And that's the way I was during the Bureau of Prisons.
Yeah.
I never was afraid of any of them for some reason. I guess stupidity.
Well, it worked for you.
Yeah, I made it.
You made it, didn't you?
Been a long time ago.
100 years. That's an amazing milestone.
Yeah.
And you've seen a lot. So, I'd really like to thank you for, taking the time to be on the Prisoner Officer Podcast.
It's no problem. No, I'm not tied down with any work right now.
Okay. And I'd also like to thank you for your service, both in the military and to the government.
I like that job with Atomic Energy. I had a top secret clearance.
Yeah.
And I escorted, I didn't know what it was, And I wasn't supposed to, but I run into one time. Nobody was allowed I flew in one of them old Goonie birds, DCs.
Okay.
Twin engine.
Uh-huh.
And nobody was allowed on that airplane except me. I mean, nobody, if I wasn't on that airplane, nobody was on it, the crew even.
Wow. Right.
And when we'd land at an airport to spend the night, they would send out their Air Force, police around me. I had a thing, I'd seal the door on that plane, and nobody got in it until I opened it and went in it.
Wow.
And it was strictly, I carried some, I guess, pretty high-powered stuff at one time or another.
Oh, I bet.
I know one time I landed at this airport, this Army base up in the Dakotas or somewhere.
Uh-huh.
And the commandant come out. And, of course, I had a uniform. I carried a pistol and everything. And he was going to get on that airplane.
Okay.
And he says, I'm the commandant of this base. This is a military airplane, and I'm going to get on it. And I just pulled my pistol out, and I said, one more step, and you'll be on it. You'll be under it. Well, he said, I'll have your job. All blah, 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 blah.
Uh-huh.
I got back to my base, in Albuquerque, and the guy called me and says, "You have a little trouble with this guy?" And I said, "Yeah." Well, he says, "Don't worry about it." He said, "We burnt his butt." And the next time he didn't have any security out there or anything. Next time I landed at that airport, he had half a dozen airmen surrounding that plane. He wasn't going to get in trouble again.
I bet. Yeah.
But I don't know, a lot of guys were scared to death when they worked in it. I worked with some guys that were just nervous as a cat on a tin roof.
Sure.
You know? They were. If I'd have worked in a place that I was that scared all the time, I wouldn't have liked it at all.
Right.
But I guess I just too stupid. I don't know.
I think we become used to it after a while, you know?
I guess I did anyhow.
Yeah. I've worked in several penitentiaries myself, and you don't realize until you talk to other people where you actually do work, you know?
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think the public perception was of correctional officers back then, or prison guards? Were you considered law enforcement back then, or what did the public think?
Gosh, I never paid much attention to it. I just never. I tell you, wear uniforms. We had uniforms,
right?
You know. But I never enjoyed a day in the Bureau of Prisons.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a job. It was a short, job that I knew I was going to retire. Mm-hmm. And all I want to do is just put in my 8 hours and retire.
Right, right.
And a lot of people worked under strain all the time.
Yeah.
I've seen some nervous as a cat on a tin roof, they just walked around scared. And that's terrible, that. And there's a lot of the officers I worked with that way. They were afraid of the convicts.
Right.
And, the convict can tell it, too. You know that.
Oh, absolutely. The minute they put eyes on you. Yep. Well, Bob,
I never looked back. When I walked out that front gate, I never looked back. Retirement
was there for you, and you'd done your time.
That's right.
Did you do anything after the Bureau, or did you just retire?
Yeah, I worked as a wagon master for caravans in Mexico and Alaska.
Wow. That was quite a change. Tell me about that.
Yeah, a caravan, from motorhomes and everything. Uh-huh. I traveled all over Mexico and Alaska for 5 years until finally wife got tired of it, and we bailed out. But I enjoyed it,
Oh, I bet.
We did all of Mexico, Yucatan, everywhere.
Boy, you've seen some stuff. Yeah, you've seen some stuff.
Yeah. Then after we retired, we've traveled the whole world. We've been to Egypt. We've been all over Europe. I came down the Nile. I've come down the big rivers in Germany. What is that river?
The Rhine.
The Rhine, yes.
Yeah.
And I've covered I never got into Russia. I didn't want to go there anyhow.
Right.
But the wife and I, we traveled all over Europe, and everything.
Oh, well, that's amazing. That's,
Ireland, New Zealand. And, of course, I was in New Zealand and Australia during the war, but we didn't go back there. But we went back to Samoa. I took her back to Samoa.
Tell me about that. They honored you while you were there, correct?
Yeah. I was a Fomai, which was a chief, when I first went there, of course, it was a military base, the 1st Marines. We had lots of wounded in there. And submarines had come in for repairs. I was on their medic. Okay. I was a medic, and I had a little dispensary out in the jungle. Uh-huh. 2 of us medics out there, and we had 2 native nurses. And I traveled all over that island, with the nurses. Uh-huh. I'd go to these different villages. Some of them we had to get in there to them by outriggers boats to get in there. Some of them we had to climb the mountain to get into it. And I spent, about a year and a half there, 2 years maybe. And it's quite an adventure.
Oh,
and then, of course, when the wife and I went back out there, the head honcho, the head Samoan, he had this big celebration for us and invited the heads of some of the other close islands, and we had a great time,
Wonderful.
And well, I thought it was just wonderful, but shoot, when I was over there, all I wanted to do was come home.
Yeah. Well, it was a different time then. You were there during the war. Oh my gosh. Well, you've lived quite a life, Bob.
Well, I've been around.
Yeah, all over the place. That's amazing.
Yeah. I've enjoyed it, I never drank, I never smoked, and I guess that's why I've lived so long.
Yeah.
But wife and we got 3 fine boys that are all very successful, and I can't complain about a thing.
Wow. Well, I'm just amazed by your story, and I'm so happy that you took time to chat with us here on the Prison Officer Podcast so that I can share this with everybody else. Any thoughts you'd like to leave us with before I close out?
No.
Okay.
Not that I know of. I know one thing. I never drive by that penitentiary, and I never look at it.
Oh, really?
When I walked out that front gate, I says, adios.
Yep. That chapter of your life was over.
Samoan would say, tofa soli.
Tofa soli. That means
goodbye.
Goodbye. Well,
I learned to speak Samoan,
Sure.
Because I had 2 native nurses, and I had about 5 or 6 villages. It wasn't bad, but of course, all I wanted to do was go home,
Sure.
in those days. But the wife and I enjoyed our going back out there. We was honored, and we enjoyed every bit of it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to end today's podcast with Tofa Soli, and I hope to see you again soon, Bob, and talk to you.
Okay. Hello, Phil. Goodbye.
I can't thank Bob enough for taking the time to tell us his amazing story. I feel privileged to have been able to do this interview with such a great man who was willing to share a little bit of prison officer history with us. I hope you enjoyed it also. If you haven't already, check out the Prisoner Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button or leave us a message. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google, or Spotify, click the subscribe button. If you enjoy these podcasts, you enjoyed this interview, the best way that you can help this podcast grow is to share this with your friends and coworkers. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.